just another mixed banks model. And so there's a lot of stuff inside central banks and outside central banks that this reflects. I have 3 of these listed in red for just a simple reason, because I wanted to show to some extent there's lots of different models, but the results you get from the models are very similar. So again, I'm not going to do a lot of details here, but this takes those three models that I have in red. So one is actually quite old, 1993. These are also getting old, 2004, 2007, but more modern in a sense. And you can see they give results quite similar. This is what happens when there's a shock to the interest rate. The central bank eases money too much or not enough. So the top on the left here is the increase in the interest rate. And this shows you that for that, and it's about the same in all 3. This is what happens for one kind of policy. GDP falls as an output. This is inflation. Inflation falls. So a lot of similarity. And if I went through, all 20 models, there would be quite a bit of similarity to them, even though they're coming from different researchers, different parts of the world. There's a framework there that is not just idiosyncratic. There's kind of a lot of stuff. Doesn't mean it's right yet, but there's a lot there to say there is not only a framework for policy, but it's based on theory. And it's also based on experience. And so let me talk a little bit about the experience. Okay? So this is a quick summary of things that we've discovered about this framework just from observing the world. So first thing is we have evidence that during periods when policy was close to that framework, that rule, things worked well. When policy was away from that framework, that rule, things didn't work so well. So the first bullet point I can illustrate in this way. Okay, so this is an illustration of my first point that you can really see differences in results. This goes back to demonstrating the experience that we've had. This is a chart that comes from the Federal Reserve System, actually the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, way back in 1995. And what they did, these 2 researchers, Chetan and Judd, they looked first at the actual interest rate set by the Fed, and that's the solid line. Solid line is the actual interest rates, and it goes back to 1965, goes through the period when they wrote the paper in 1995. And the dashed line is what you get from when you use one of this framework. In particular, it's the framework of the policy rule that I mentioned. Okay, so they observed that during this period, this is written in 1995, so during this period, when people were discovering this kind of framework, writing it down, that the policy was very close to the framework. Here the policy was very close to the framework. Here the policy wasn't even close to the framework. It was way off. All the policy basically, because of ups and downs like the framework, but basically too low. Well, as many as you know, during this period, economic performance was terrible. During the period over there, economic performance was quite good. This is the beginning of the Great Moderation, it's sometimes called in the United States. This is back in the Great Stagflation period, where we had a recession every 3 or 4 years. So again, there's a sort of experience, not only the theory, but the experience sort of confirms that this framework has worked pretty well when it's followed, but not when it isn't. This is a chart that comes also from the Federal Reserve System, St. Louis Fed. And this is from a paper written by Bill Poole when he was president of the St. Louis Fed back in 2007. And you can see he's showing the way in which the actual interest rate is similar to the other chart. The actual interest rate in black corresponds pretty closely to the actual decision of the Federal Reserve. That's the blue line. And for the most part, that's the case. However, if you notice towards the end, things are going off, and the interest rate is much lower than would be suggested by the frame talking about interest rates got too low. So you might think that you could look at the economic performance that corresponds to this. Again, think of this is a way to measure the way policy was close to the paradigm, This is where it kind of was off the paradigm, and whoops. And this is a period before where it was off the paradigm. And then just to summarize the performance, the so-called Great Moderation period occurred when policy was close to the paradigm. In this period is where we started to run into the problems of the financial crisis, and the period before is where we're not. So it seems to me, if you just sort of use common sense, you have the theory, you have experience, you see a great deal to support the framework that I listed, in fact, a framework that was used for quite a while. So that would tell me partly the justification for my answer being no. But there's a lot more to look at besides that, and that is the degree to which deviations from the framework may have been good or bad. So I want to look at those. Maybe they were helpful. Maybe we can get even better in some sense. So far, I've argued it's worked. Okay, so to do that, and this is where I'm mentioning there's a lot of sort of institutional detail that I need to refer to at least briefly. Okay, so what I've done on this list is made a table of all the different ways the central bank of the United States did things differently than would be considered normal monetary policy. Okay, so we talked about it in the introduction. Some of these things may have been good, some of them not so good. Okay, so I just want to describe what they are, because this is the fact that this list is so long indicates how much monetary policy framework has changed, and it may just be temporary, it may go back, we don't really know. Okay, so just really quickly, I listed by date the times these were created, and we're looking at the Federal Reserve, Central Bank of the United States. So the first big one was to offer special borrowing facilities to banks right after the crisis flared up. Okay, so to do that, they had to expand their balance sheet. Then they offered loans to foreign central banks to intervene in the dollar markets. That was, swaps are not new, but swaps for this purpose is new. And they started making loans not just to commercial banks, but to investment banks. Investment banks as primary dealers, was a primary dealer credit facility, and started in March 2008. So the crisis is really now underway, and things starting to go. Then they used the Fed's balance sheet to bail out Bear Stearns creditors. They basically just created money, and with that money they made loans to J.P. Morgan originally, and then invested in the securities, the toxic securities at Bear Stearns in a special fund called Maiden Lane 1. And then the bailout of AIG, the same thing. The Federal Reserve funds are now being used. Money is being created to make loans to AIG to invest in their securities. They had Maiden Lane is actually a little alley next to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So they decided to call this little fund Maiden Lane 1, Maiden Lane 2, Maiden Lane 3. These symbols like AIA, Alico are just the subsidiaries of AIG they're investing in. Then you had special facilities when the panic began in September, October 2008, special facilities to support the commercial paper market, which froze up in the panic. So that's really making it, giving loans to banks so they can buy commercial paper. Same with the this facility here. This is really focused on the money markets, which froze up. This is commercial paper directly, so it's more on the money markets. And that's all during the panic period. And then finally, after the panic in November 2008, when things stabilized for a while, they started buying mortgages. These were purchases of asset-backed securities that backed things like automobile loans, student loans, not just mortgages. And then when that had stopped for quite a while, but then finally you might notice as part of the European rescue package for Greece and other countries, the Fed has made special loans to the ECB so they can help in the dollar market as well. Okay, so it's quite a list.